Video game protagonists come in all shapes and sizes. There's one type of character, if we can call it that, which has existed since the very start of the medium, and that is the noble roly ball. I'm Dr. Joe Baxter Webb, a professional game designer with a PhD in media and cultural studies. Here on the Indie Game Clinic, I playtest games which developers are currently still working on to see what kind of helpful lessons we can take from them about game design and creative practice more generally. Today we're looking at a Steam demo for a game called SpHero, a game which returns to that age-old question which has kept so many of us up at night. What if a hero was perfectly round? Now, try to meet the game where it is in its own development journey and give feedback that's going to be useful and relevant to that game and to its developer.
But the x-axis felt like it was inverted, and it took me a while to get used to. It does feel a lot more natural with mouse and keyboard, and you can turn it around way quicker, which I suspect makes the dash work better as well. So my controls for doing abilities are mapped onto F and E. I don't know, it feels like the abilities could be mapped onto the mouse buttons.
Sometimes this is about the game itself, and sometimes it's about the broader context of who the game is aimed at or how it differentiates itself from other things in the market. To start off, the problem that's going to be faced by any kind of roll the ball game is this is a genre that often gets used to tutorialize game engines. And a lot of your potential audience will know this, and it might impact how the game is perceived.
There's a lot of inconsistency in the textures used here. High-res textures on a lot of the environment, and then this kind of more plastic-looking platform here. I don't know, I suppose the ball has its own charm being rendered that way, but it does look a little bit like a placeholder at the moment.
By and large, the Steam audience is less likely to take a gamble on a game which looks like it was a learning project or a sort of polished version of one of the tutorials that might be on Unity or Unreal. And that means if you're making a game of this type, you might have to work extra hard to convince people of the value of the game that you're making. Now, there are some very premium games in this genre, but those are quite few and far between. I think this game struggles quite a bit with knowing whether it's meant to be a dexterity game or a puzzle game, so it's hard to really know what audience it's supposed to be appealing to.
I know there's maybe some like high concept version of this where it's like, oh, you're the only sphere in a world full of evil cubes, but even then it does feel like a bit of a cop-out excuse to not have more characterful objects. Look at this annoyingly slender ramp. So slender. Look at this one. Oh, look at that little lip at the top. That's very irritating. And these bumps look like they should just be purely decorative, but they do sort of make you bounce a little bit each time you hit them, which slows you down. Oh. Smooth, round,
game feel. Game feel is a technical term in game design which, well, it means what it sounds like it means, how a game feels to play. In the case of SpHero, there are a fair few issues here. When I press the boost button that pushes me forward, I expect to boost in the direction that I'm already travelling in, but instead I zoom in the direction that the camera is pointed.
This is definitely a lot more fun to control with the mouse and keyboard than it is the controller, and it's mainly due to the turning speed. Like, the controller just doesn't seem to turn fast enough when I played it before with that. This jump is quite irritating. You sort of have to boost and then jump. If you jump and then boost, you just bounce off the other side.
The camera controls also feel quite odd at times because the x-axis is inverted, despite the rest of the controls feeling like regular third-person character controls. So pushing left to turn something clockwise feels a bit more like I'm pushing a shopping trolley than rolling a ball. And there's a lot here in terms of the feel of the movement that just doesn't line up with what I expect of a ball.
These first areas are all pretty solid, I think, but Stuff like this level geometry where you can get caught on it feels more like it's designed for a walking character rather than a ball. I mean, the rolling is fun in the sense that it makes the character feel a little bit unwieldy, and like you want that to a degree in an action game. You want the character to be something you have to master because they have sort of idiosyncrasies in terms of how they move. That's fine, but sometimes this just feels like a running character that's represented as a ball just because a ball is easier to make. I imagine when I've upgraded my jump, it's going to be a lot easier to do that ground pound on the enemies, but it's quite hard to get above them at the moment. It does make it satisfying when you do, though.
There aren't enough places where I can actually achieve a smooth rolling motion. In fact, it feels almost like the ball could just be an invisible hitbox for a platformer character running around with legs, or some other kind of vehicle. There are two types of toys from the real world that I think of as a reference point for rolling ball games, in terms of what I would expect them to feel like. One of those would be this kind of thing where the user manipulates the whole world and rolls the ball, and it tries to avoid holes or tries to get the ball into holes, and the ball is moving of its own volition as the player moves the world around. The other toy that comes to mind is the humble marble run.
Marble race teaches the children fair play.
Oh boy, this is fun. Let's play it again.
Pick up Marble Race at your favorite toy counter.
But our titular SpHero is never able to pick up enough momentum to ever really feel like it has the flow of a rolling ball, which is a problem because everyone who plays your game knows what a ball feels like in the real world.
So those jumps are a bit... They confused me a little bit the first time I saw them because they looked like a pickup. So I was a bit worried that after you'd use them, they'd go away and you wouldn't be able to use them again. Because you've got this visual language for what a pickup is a spinny, shiny thing. So I think if we're going to have jumps on the ground, they should look like a fixture rather than a pickup. Because particularly on levels later on, I was worried that I was only going to get to use them once and they were going to be gone after that. That's quite satisfying when you feel like you've cheated out a bit of the level by boosting across it.
One of the things that would be really helpful for the developer to do here is some observed playtesting. For example, taking the game to a small local convention where people that you don't know can play the game. You can just sort of watch them. In this context, playtesting isn't about seeing what people think. It's not about asking them to answer questions. It's just about watching them play and seeing what they get stuck on and what they get frustrated about.
There's something about these vines and the way you move up them. You can't roll straight up them, you have to dash. And the dash doesn't really feel like something that you would use to go upwards like that. Or that one was much better, that was smoother.
A lot of new designers make the mistake of thinking that playtesting is about asking people what they thought. But the thing is, when people get stuck and frustrated in a game, some people will tell you what their problem is, but many won't because they're embarrassed, or they'll just have forgotten by the time they finish playing. So when you do this kind of playtesting, treat it as an observed science experiment. Watch what the player does, watch their hands, watch the things they struggle with in terms of how the controls work. Because I had a lot of issues in this area and they're very difficult to communicate in a video.
Oh look, it's a Portal Companion Cube. Wonder if there's a reason for that there, if I can get it through the level.
Whereas watching a player get stuck with this game in the same room as them is going to be much better if you want to improve these controls.
There's lots of these kind of little bumpy ridges that are a bit annoying to interact with.
Watching people's hands and their faces and their emotions as they play will be critical to making something which feels much nicer to interact with.
You can actually upgrade the bouncing ability, which is quite cool. We've got bounce and a dash. Not sure what these card suits do. But yeah, there's a sense that there's lots of stuff to unlock in this game, which is nice to know. I think there's something about the geometry of these objects that's just a bit too complex for rolling on. They don't feel designed for it. They're very pretty in a kind of plasticky Jack and the Beanstalk kind of way. This level I find it frustrating, but it is a little bit more, feels a bit more rolling based. This bit is a pretty great little combo of jumps if you can land them straight each time. That's See, being able to do that without missing any of them is really quite satisfying, but I didn't do it that time.
Overall, the motion in this game leaves me with the feeling that I'm not really playing as a smoothly rolling spherical ball, which in turn leads to me feeling like the ball is really just an excuse not to have a character, rather than to explore the kinetic pleasure of rolling, which is what it should be doing. The movement isn't ball-like enough to justify it being a ball, and the environment doesn't really encourage ball-like movement like, say, a Sonic the Hedgehog level might.
I think this level is quite non-linear. It looks like there's other places to go, but I don't feel super motivated to explore them because I don't really care about collecting the currency or what other things there are to collect yet. The thing about kind of collection and metagame systems based around collection is your players really have to care about doing the core activity of your game before they're going to want to go off on some other path to find all the stuff. Oh, look. Got these leaves. No.
The art and the creative direction. Okay, so first off, it's totally fine to have limitations on what you can do in terms of the art in your game, and to build your game and structure your development process around those limitations. For example, Mini Metro, which is a game that's made in excess of $5 million since it was released, started out as a game jam game. When the developers were deciding what to make, they realised they couldn't really do character art, so they limited themselves to game ideas which would work without characters. So it's totally valid to rule out things you just know you can't do. That's well within the toolkit of creative strategies which successful indie games have used in the past. But that doesn't mean that we should miss opportunities for easy wins when it comes to having some sort of narrative framing which hooks players in.
I think from a setting perspective, these beanstalk things are already suggesting a sort of Jack and the Beanstalk Grimm's fairy tales thing, but because we don't have any characters, it feels like we're not really leaning into that fully.
SpHero is currently quite abstract. I don't really know what this world is, or why I'm moving a ball around in it, or why I'm collecting coins, and there's definitely a version of this game where the ball is still a ball that rolls around, but a ball that means so much more.
So I could definitely see a version of this that is a bit more based around sort of fairy tale magic, and the ball being a crystal ball and leaning into that theme a bit more. Some really good sort of action puzzle design here. I don't know if these levels are just a bit compressed together because I'm playing the demo, but it does feel a bit like it introduces new types of challenge or mechanic quite rapidly. So, you know, in the full version, I would expect to see these changes in kind of level style and these different types of game mechanic hopefully kind of come in a bit more slowly. Oh, I popped.
I've spoken about how the game struggles with the sphere part of its title, but here's where the hero part comes in, or more specifically, where it currently fails to. It's unclear whether I'm supposed to relate to the ball as a player avatar, or whether the titular hero is meant to be some off-screen presence manipulating balls through the power of telekinesis. Nothing in the game really invites me as a player to identify as the ball, or even as the controller of the ball. There's no fantasy there. There's no, oh, you're the Wizard of Orbs, or whatever. I know some people will be thinking, oh, you're just overthinking this. This is too deep a thought process for an abstract rolly ball game. To which I would say something like, shut up, you're wrong. But perhaps to put it a bit more productively, the rolly ball games which have done this aspect well and have had a little bit of fantasy and a little bit of world building around it tend to be the ones which end up achieving financial and critical success. So let's assume that that part was probably important. I think for the game title here to make sense, the developer is going to have to make some decisions about what the heroism is. One choice is to do something to make the ball feel a bit more like a character, something like in Rock of Ages or Katamari Damacy. Another option is to think about the fantasy of the world and how the player could be this off-screen force who is controlling things, sort of like a commander in a strategy game or a manager in a business simulation like Theme Park or Theme Hospital. I don't think you necessarily need to go super deep into narrative or having any sort of overt story in the game, But at least having a framing of who the player is in relation to this ball will help to answer a lot of these broad creative questions and to drive other aspects of the development and, more importantly, make people want to play this. It might sound like I've been overly negative on this game. It's too fiddly to be a smooth action game, and I don't care enough about what I'm being asked to do to progress to want to endure with the fail and retry loop. When I fall down a hole because the game is annoying to control, I don't think, woo, I can't wait to have another turn at doing that. It just puts me off. But SpHero is still a bit of a blank canvas when it comes to its theme and its world. So I think if the developer works on some of those game feel issues and then also thinks a bit more about the thematics and who or what the player is, they could be onto something.
Yeah, I'm not looking forward to trying to hop up these beanstalks. Like, the vertical movement in this game is not... It doesn't control very well, and when I land on a surface like this, I roll off quite easily, so... Just remembering to hold the jump button, and I don't even know if that is a thing or if it's just psychosomatic where I think I need to hold the jump button to jump longer. Maybe need some sort of visual indication for what's going on there. Again, the problem with having a player character that's so abstract. If you look at that icon in the top right when I'm using my abilities, it's all very well to have an ability status icon like that, but if this ball was a character, then the character would be also indicating the status of these abilities by its animations and so on. But we're missing that information because it's a ball. A ball works really well for a game where the only mechanics are to roll. As soon as we start adding in these abilities, we increase the need for other types of information, because my eyes are locked on the middle of the screen where the ball is and the environment around it, and anything that's at the edge of the screen, it can be like an extra way of telling us about what abilities the player's got and can use, but I don't think it can be the main source of information because it's not in the focal area of the game. You know, if this was a fighting game and I was blocking, it wouldn't be enough to just have an icon in the corner saying you're blocking. You need to show a shield. And also makes your game more streamable because players who aren't the person playing the game can actually see what's happening when abilities are being used, if they have animations and VFX and stuff. If you're completely reliant on the HUD for that sort of information, then it becomes very hard to watch someone else play the game and know what's going on. I could see this game being quite a popular streaming game, actually, particularly if it had some really hard levels. Some of these challenges, like this hop across these 3 bits, this is what I consider trollishly hard. But I don't, you know, I'm not the sort of person who values super hard things, but I could see how this is a fun spectator sport.
They've obviously got some cool level design abilities in here. The environments I got to play in were varied and they were well structured. They just didn't feel good to move through. Every project you make is going to have some sort of learning value to it, but when you're a solo indie dev or in a very small team, you have to work out how committed you are to doing all of the other stuff, not just coding and level design, but caring about the top level creative direction and the feel driven stuff which will ultimately make or break your game in the market.
Feelings. Yeah, I really do think the kind of level and challenge design is really strong here. Although I'm probably going to rag a bit on the game for the kind of placeholder looking ball and the placeholder looking enemies and the lack of theme. I think there is some really fun level design here. And I think, even though I can tell there are little kind of secrets off to the side that I should be looking for, there's not too much of it. I feel like I'm completing a decent amount of the level. Where's that jump supposed to take me to?
SpHero is at the moment just too abstract and too lacking in theme. And this makes it feel a bit childish, which I think I've said before on this channel is not really a good target audience for anything on Steam. But that lack of flavour, that lack of theme, it's not necessarily a bad place to be in creatively, because you can still add that. There is still so many directions this can go in, whether you decide to make the ball genuinely feel more like a ball or abandon it for something more character based. If you do decide to fix the controls through a lot of playtesting and refining and maybe even redesigning some level elements so that it feels actually fun to roll around, you're still going to need some kind of interesting theme or premise to hook people into this. Because at the moment I just can't tell what's heroic about being a ball that falls down a hole. The thing about having a game that's a bit lacking in theme is you can still do anything with it. There are so many directions you can take this in. Like, for example, here's my pitch video for SpHero Edgy Edition, with a desaturated colour palette, excessive amounts of bloom effects, and a soundtrack by the new metal band Deftones.